Hello and welcome to a new module. This module, I call it the address book. This is module number 5 and the goal is to explore additional features of the iOS library and work on a new project. We will mimic a project that is, I believe everyone will be familiar with, which is the address book. You all have an address book on your phone and you have probably used it before. So we're going to try to create a simple form of an address book and use it to learn about different features of this application. So our initial problem can be stated like this. Create an address book app. As I mentioned before, the initial problem is vague, is short, and it describes an idea that either somebody walks up to you and say, hey, I want you to help me with this, or you come up with it and say, okay, how can I start? Where do I take it further? And how can I move forward? And I have heard from some of you that while you are following through, you understand what we have done, you still feel that you can't do it by yourself. And I have to be honest with you, nobody really can. Nobody starts with an app knowing exactly for sure how they are going to develop it. This is why it's very important that we follow a process, understand the process, follow it, and trust the process and trust yourself that it will lead you to where you need to be. So we have a simple process that we follow. I call it the app development process. It's a mixture of software development life cycle and a mixture of project development life cycle, as well as something called the creative problem solving process. So this process has 3 steps. Step number 1 is to formulate a problem. I call it problem formulation. Step number 2 is to formulate a solution to the problem. And step number 3 is to implement that solution. However, when we implement this process, and if you think of this as your project time, so you're going to start the project here, and this will be the end. And this time can be 1 week, it can be 2 weeks, it can be 3 weeks, 3 months, 1 year, whatever it is. We implement this process in what I would call iterations. So you will have, at the start of the project, we will have iteration number 1 that will span a portion of your project time. So this portion can be few hours, could be few days, could be few weeks, depending what it is. And we're going to call this iteration number 1. Inside this iteration number 1, we implement the process. So inside this, we implement step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. So we're going vertical in the project, implementing a subset of our project. And when we are done with it, we go back again and have another iteration. So this becomes iteration 2, in which we still do step 1, step 2, and step 3. And when we are done with this, this will be iteration number 2. Then we go to iteration 3. So that's iteration 3. And again, inside iteration 3, we still do the process step 1, step 2, and step 3, and so on and so forth. How many iterations should I have in your project? In the project, it matters. You definitely need more than 1 iteration, and you don't want to have 1500 iterations. So maybe between 3 and 7 iterations, 3 and 9 iterations, depending on your experience. If you have multiple teams, how long is the project time? So all of these are factors, but you definitely want to allow yourself to go through the process multiple times to allow yourself to evolve in your understanding of the problem and your understanding of the solution. Nobody starts, again, I repeat this again because I hear it a lot from you, nobody starts knowing everything. You know something, and from the little that you know, and the process that you hopefully become skillful at, You start by one simple iteration with what you know, and then you progress slowly but hopefully surely. So we have create an address book app. Let's start with iteration number 1 and implement the process. So step number 1 is the problem formulation. And in the problem formulation, we do 3 things. Step number 1 is research. Find out what's out there. What is a typical address book app will have? I will not spend time on this because I chose an app that you all know and you all have used. So you know that an address book, the phone has a standard address book that has contacts, and you add a new contact and you can group contacts together in groups and so on and so forth. So you do some research, you discover what's in an address book app, who has what, and what is good, what is bad. Read the reviews and try to gain a better understanding of what's out there in the market. Then the next step is to define the scope. What is the scope of your app? What the app will do, and most importantly, what the app will not do. So your scope focuses your attention on what your app will be, and maybe this will be your app version 1. You probably have used apps before, and nobody starts with a perfect app. You start with a version 1 that you release in the market. It stays in the market for some time, and while you gather feedback from your users, you start working on version number 2 and so on. But the scope here, if this is going to be version 1, then we need to focus the scope. What exactly I am going to develop in here. And then the third step is the testing. How I'm going to test the app. When the app is done, what kind of test do I have to run to ensure that the app does work and achieve the scope that we have accomplished. So in our scope here for this app, and let me make some room here, I'm going to go back to the testing. I just want to write everything together. So the scope of our app, we need an app where the user can see a list of contacts. When the user can add a new contact, and the user can view the details of a contact. So that will be the scope. You can define right now what exactly is a contact, or if that is still vague in your mind, you can leave it, and in the next iteration when we get to it, we will have to define it. The third part is the testing. How are we going to test this application? So when you test, you're trying to evaluate your scope. So you will want to start with the app that has 1 or 2 contacts. You view the list and see if you see the 2 contacts. If you do, then you achieve the first scope. You go and you try to add a new contact, and then you see that contact in the list, then you achieve that scope. You click on a contact, or you try to display the details of the contact and you see those details, then you achieve that scope. So we can say here in our app, we're going to have a sample contact. So the app loads with a sample contact. If you use Apple, usually when you buy a new phone, you'll see in your contact list contacts for Apple, help, support, contacts for your wireless carrier, and so on. So we'll have some sample contacts. And then we'll add a test contact. Let's say the username will the first name test, so we can specify the details of that once we define the details of the contact, and then we view the details of the contact. You may write this in much more details than this, or simple details, doesn't matter. There are actually tools where you can automate, like you write a program that will run that test. So you can run the test manually, or you can also do automated testing. Step number 2 is the solution formulation. I want to argue that you have trouble with the solution formulation because you try to skip over the problem formulation. If you do not help yourself by scoping your problem, thinking about the testing, the solution formulation will be a daunting task. Because here you want to define what the app will look like. And if you did not ease yourself to that step through thinking through the problem, doing the research that you need to do, this will be quite daunting. In the solution formulation, we further simplify by following the model view controller design pattern. So in the model view controller, we define the model. By this we mean what data the app will need and how to present the data in the app. The second step is the view, and the view is what the user will see and what actions the user will take, and the controller determines what features and at what events these features will be executed or implemented. So what data the app will need, you go back to the scope and you look for nouns. So within my scope, the list of contacts, that's a data. And as you can see from the word list, that tells you this is a collection. And we have used collections before in project number 1, and we have used it again in project number 2 and in project number 3. There is also the contact. That's also data. And there's the details of the contact, which will be also some data. So the data that we have in this project is a list of contacts. So this is a collection. We learned about two collections before. The NS array, which is an indexed collection, an ordered collection with index from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this collection is what we call is cannot change, is immutable. Meaning that once you initialize the collection, you can't add to it or remove from it. The other collection that we learned about is the NS dictionary. And there was an option in project number 3. If you use that option, then you explore the NS dictionary. There is another one called, similar to the NS array, we call it the NS mutable array. The NS mutable array is very similar to the NS array in terms that it's an indexed or ordered collection, but it is mutable, meaning that you can add items after initialization. When you think of your address book versus, for instance, project number 3, the unit converter, in the unit converter, the app loads with all the units. So the units is already known. So we used an NS array or NS dictionary and that was fine. But in the list of contacts, the app loads and you don't really know the contacts. Some of you may have 10 contacts and other may have 100 contacts. So you don't really know how many items will be in the list. If that's your situation and you're looking for a collection where you're not really sure what the number of contacts or collection items will be, the NS mutable array will be the collection. So for this particular project, we'll use the NS mutable array to manage the list of contacts. Second is the contact. What is a contact? If from the research, the contact has a person's name, so we can say that there is a first name, there is a last name, there is contact information, and in the address book application, there is multiple phone numbers, multiple possibilities for email, home address, work address, date of birth, picture. There's so many different things. For simplicity, I'm just gonna add an email address here, but whatever I am doing in establishing a contact, you can just add to it. And you can say, well, I want my contact to have an address. Then add an address and follow exactly the same things that we will do with a contact with these 3 pieces of information. So how do we model this? So we learn that we need a list of contacts and we're going to use the NS mutable array library in order to represent that list of contacts. But how about contact? A contact is really something we call custom type. What do I mean by custom type? There's nothing in the library that simulates a contact. For a first name, I have a string. A last name, I can use a string. The email address, I can use a string. But what is a contact? A contact embodies all these three. A contact is a type that contains inside it as a member a first name, a last name, and an email. Every person is a new instance of that contact, and that's why we call it's a custom type. And this is new. We have not done custom types before, so this is our first time to create our own custom type, and we will see how we're going to do that. But the inside or the members of that custom types are things that we already know: the first name, last name, and email address. So that is the model. One other thing about the model that you may start to think about is, where is this data going to be stored? By default, everything we create and everything we've created in the past, we store it in the memory. And the memory is fine as long as your app is open and your phone is on. The memory does not get reset. But once you close the app, the memory associated with the app is reset. And once you turn off your phone, the memory associated with your phone is reset. So if you want to save information beyond your app or beyond the turn off of the phone, you want to look at the actual drive of your device. So you want to save on the device. You can save a file on the device, or you can save to a database on the device, or you can save through a network. So you can save on iCloud, or you can save on a network server or a database server somewhere else outside of your device at all. So that's something we think about in the model as well. And in this project, there is an advanced topic associated with this project to save the contacts to a file on our device. So if you're interested, this will be an extra credit. So we'll leave that to that iteration when we get to it. So that's the model. Now, how about the view? The view is what the user will see. So in the view, we learned about creating a mockup in the previous project, and we looked at a tool like mybalsamic.com to learn how we can create a mockup. But you can sketch a mockup. So for this app, we can say, well, the user will open the app and they will see a list of contacts. And then maybe we will give the user a button here to add a new contact. And when the user click on that button, it will open a new view or a new screen where the user will be able to add the first name, add the last name, and add email. So these will be text field, and then the user will have the ability to save or to cancel out of it if they want, and that will take them back here. And when the user click on one of the contact, they go to another view where they can see the details of the contact. So we maybe will say the user can see here the first name and the last name. And then when they go to the details contact, they can see the first name, the last name, and the email. And if you decide to add more contacts, they can see the more contacts as well. So we have a details. And we have the new contact, and then we have the list of contacts. And we have the list of contacts. When the app opens, the list comes up. So all the associations of the contacts and the collections and so on, it needs to be displayed. So what should we use to display a list of contacts? We learned so far, and we have been using the view controller. And the view controller gives you a view and you can add components to it. So these details where we can probably use labels for those details, these can be view controllers. The new, where we're going to use maybe text fields, we can use a view controller for this. But this is a list. So we're going to learn in this project about a new controller called the table view controller. Almost every app that you use uses some sort of a table view controller. Any list to display, like your text messages, your email messages, your contact list, and others, they all use a table view controller. So we will learn, and this is again another new element for this project, using the table view controller for the view. Then the last item is the controller. And the table view controller has a special controller associated with it, very similar to the picker view, where you have to specify a data source, you have to specify the rows, how many sections, and what goes on each row, and we'll explore this further as we go into there. So we're going to use controllers to each one of those. However, we're going to create our custom contact. So we're going to create our own type for contact, and we're going to create our own data source. If you recall, when we used the project number 3 with the picker view, we had an option to associate a data source with the picker view, and in that case we made the controller to be the data source for the picker view. That situation, we used an array to represent our units, and it makes sense. There wasn't really much the data source will do that the controller doesn't do. In this project, another new element is that we're going to use our own data source that will be separate from the controller. So we'll have the data source, and then we'll have the typical controller. So we'll have a table view controller for the table view screen, a new view controller for the new screen, and a detailed controller for the detailed screen. Finally, the last step is the solution implementation. And to implement this project, we'll break it down into several iterations. So iteration number 1 is what we have right now, and this we're going to call it the planning iteration and the setup. And then we have iteration number 2, and you can choose what you want it to do. Definitely displaying the list is very important, so I'm going to use this as iteration 2, display list of contacts. Iteration 3, you can choose to either add a new contact or display the details. I'm going to go with add new contact here in iteration 3, and then in iteration 4, I'm going to go for display contact details. And then that will be your required part of the project. 2 iterations will represent the extra credit. So iteration number 5 will enable to delete a contact and reorder contacts. And then finally, iteration 6. Iteration 6 will be advanced, where we save the contacts to a file. So iteration 5 and iteration 6 are both extra credit if you are interested in them. So going for the setup, so we're gonna still in the implementation, and we'll say the setup for the project. So we'll open a new project in Xcode. And what is critical here is that the project opens with a single view template. But we don't want that view. So we're going to delete that view and add a new table view. So let's see how we're going to do that. So we open Xcode and create a new Xcode project. We're going to still select the single view application and give it a name. So I'm going to use my last name underscore, and I'm going to call this address book. If you're going to set up your device on your project, then make sure you use this organization identifier to match our organization identifier that we set up. The language is Swift and the devices is iPhone. Then next, and choose where you want to save it, and say create the project. Xcode creates the project and creates the single view application. This is your project configuration. One thing I'm going to do in the project configuration is I'm going to take out the launch screen. You see here under app icons and launch images, I'm going to replace the launch screen with the main storyboard so I don't get the launch screen. And then what I want to do is when you go to the storyboard, we have the view controller and it has its own class. So I want to replace this with a table view controller. So in the object library, there is the table view controller. So I'm going to add a table view controller over here on the list and maybe take out this utility. So here is a table view controller. On the view controller, I want to delete that. So select the view controller and click delete. So no table view controller, no view controller. And it reset what I just did. So let's take it back again. So bring in a table view controller and associate the initial view controller to this table view controller. Like that. And let's add the class for it. So we go to File, or in the project name, add a new file. And we're going to choose an iOS template, source, Coca Touch class. Next. And we'll choose a subclass of the table view controller. This is very important because we're creating a new controller for that table view controller, and we're going to call this the address book table view controller. And the language is Swift. Next, choose where you want to save it and what group. I'm going to put it in the project files group and then create. So here is the address book table view controller, and this is our table view controller. So I now need to link the controller with the view. So go to select the view, go to the identity inspector, and under custom class, choose the custom class that we just created. So now that we did that, I no longer need this view controller.swift. So select that, right click and say delete, and move to trash. So that is deletes that, and then go to the view controller and delete that. So we end our project with one table view controller, table view in the storyboard, and it has its associated table view controller, custom table view controller that we created. The last step in the setup is to change the width to match an iPhone. So on the width, instead of any, I'll go and choose the compact width. And this is the setup that we have. So this ends this video. We finished iteration number 1, and we set up our project for iteration number 2, where we create our custom types and display those customs in the table view control.